I would like to share some memories about my dear friend and brother Misha, who left us last week. Just a few snippets from 35 years of knowing him, I would like to share for people who would be interested to knowing more about him. I first met Misha in 1986 in the conference of the Society of Homeopaths in Loughborough. I was very young at that time and Misha was somewhat older. I had heard about him because of some friends from UK and especially heard about the School of Homeopathy and some of his work. I gave a talk in that society and Misha gave a talk too. After the talk, I went up to him and I said to him, "You know, Misha, I have come all the way from India thinking I can learn something from you, and I was eager to meet you. But your talk, it made no sense to me. You spoke about fire, earth, air, and water and wind, and it didn't make any sense to me." This was my first words to him, and I was in fact provoking him a little bit. It's not a good thing to say to somebody you meet for the first time that your talk made no sense. But I think it must have been something in him that attracted me and felt that maybe we have something in common. And I wanted to test it out by provoking him. And he looked at me and he just smiled and he said, "Well, it may make no sense to you, but it certainly does make sense to me." But the way he said it, he was not provoked, he was not offended, and he smiled. And I think it was at that moment, I can say, that I fell in love with him. And this romance of ours lasted 35 years till he passed away. What I learnt from him is that originally he was a filmmaker. He was also much into the hippie movement at that time. You know, it was in the 60s. He was a hippie, he was a filmmaker, and also that he was a single parent from very early on. You know, his son was only 6 months old when Misha became a single parent. And he brought up his son both as father and mother. And I think at that point, he got introduced to homeopathy, maybe because of his son and maybe some treatment he was looking for. I'm not so sure. But he got interested in homeopathy. He gave up his movie maker career, started studying homeopathy from one teacher. I think his name was Mom. And then he started practicing. At some point, he initiated and started the School of Homeopathy, which later on really grew very big and beautiful. And then he also, along with other colleagues, founded the Society of Homeopaths, which was an organization of professional homeopaths rather than medical doctors. So these are some things. And then at some point, he was staying in London and he moved from London to the countryside because he didn't want to live in the city. And he established he bought a home in a place called Afkalm and in Devon. And it's a very big, large house, very large house. where he housed both himself, his residence, and the school of homeopathy. And students would come in the weekends, etc. And I know that it was such a beautiful family kind of feeling. And Misha would be actually cooking for all of them. And he was an excellent cook also, I must say. So I have been part of those school meetings, etc. And it was a beautiful atmosphere to be there. He was very hospitable and very his ego was not to be seen at all. He was just mingling with them and cooking for them and making everybody feel completely at home. I've stayed in this place. It was called Yonder Cot. His house was called Yonder Cot. And he lived there for a long time and raised 3 more sons with his wife Bridget, who was an excellent support for him. I've stayed with Bridget and Misha several times in the last 35 years, maybe 10 times, 15 times, I'm not sure. And we would walk in the countryside, we would be chased by cows, we would be on the fields, and it was a dream for me to be in that kind of place. And in fact, in my mind, I thought I would also at some point like to move out of the city and be in the country. In many ways, you see, I took Misha as a kind of a example or a guide or a mentor, and through his life I learned a lot of things. And we somehow got along very well, because in some sense I think both of us are very free spirits, and he really encouraged this free spirit in me also. I remember, he used to take me to these London gardens, not London, English gardens, these lords and all used to have big houses and big gardens. And English gardens are famous, there's very huge and etc. And we used to go and visit these English gardens just for leisure. I remember on one occasion where we went to this English garden, and there was a slope of grass, there was like this, an angular slope of grass. And Misha looked at it and said, "Why don't we roll down in this grass?" Now, can you imagine? I was probably 40 years old and he was nearly 60. And we were contemplating rolling on the grass. I said, "Okay, Misha, why not?" So the two of us were rolling down, then we would go up, roll down again. I think half an hour we just spent rolling down the grass. That's the kind of energy, the spirit that he had, ready as a child, ready for adventure, ready to experience life in its fullest. He was an avid traveler. He liked to travel everywhere, and he has come to India on numerous occasions. And I remember we traveled many places together. One place we went there with Jeremy Sher and with my other friend Murray Feldman to Lucknow to visit the one very famous Indian guru. His name was Punjaji or Papaji. And we visited him. We even had a joint consultation for him, etc. And in that trip, we also traveled to Allahabad to visit the Kumbh Mela, one of the largest gatherings of humans in the world. And we walked all these places, and we would I experienced a lot of things with him, because he was not a guy who would stay in a hotel and go on conducted tours. He would say, "Let's go, let's walk, let's just go and see, let's meet the people, let's talk to them, let us experience, let us eat, in roadside dhabas." He was ready for everything. And the way he traveled was also quite amazing for me, which I have not learned this from him even till today. He would travel with just one bag, one small haversack kind of thing, and in that he would keep his 2 shirts inside and 1 trouser and something, and he would roll it up, and that's it. I mean, he never checked in luggage as far as I know. And with this bag, he could travel for 2 months. I'm sorry, I am not able to do that yet. Maybe I will learn at some point. When we traveled, we would walk, and he would talk to you. So I remember last trip we went was in January of 2020. We went to Kerala in South India together, and we stayed in a place, and then we would every day we would get out and we would walk, and we would get lost because we never had any direction, any map or nothing. Just walk and see what happens. And then one day we landed up somewhere, and we landed up in the bank of some river, and there was a one guy was sitting. He was actually like he had a hut on the bank of the river. So we went to his house, just uninvited. We don't know who the hell he is. And then we started talking, and then he told his whole story, how he was in the Middle East. And then it was an amazing story. He said that, one day he and three of his friends had gone somewhere, and they were all captured by some people, and he actually saw one of his friends getting killed in front of his eyes. And the whole story, he was narrating for almost 1 hour. We sat and listened to him. We got tea, we got dinner from them, etc. So it was like, be open to what there is, and listen. And he was an amazing listener. He was an amazing listener. I remember one of my young junior colleagues, Sarah. So she told me just last week, she said, I met him only once. And she said, I was just talking to him and I was describing some pain I was having. And he told her, I can understand you. I can feel your pain. And it's very important, that this pain is a very important thing. You see, we cannot say it's nothing, or I can feel there is pain. And she said he is the first person who was open to just listening to what kind of pain I was having, you see. And she said that made all the difference to me, because everybody else, would listen with some other thought, like some advice of you can do this, you can do that, or pain has a larger purpose in life, and this and all philosophical or medical or this kind of advice. But he's the first person who says, I can hear you, I can understand what you're going through, you see. And this was his beauty. And very rarely I have come across people like that. Very, very rarely. Who just had the space and the heart to listen to people without the need to do something or give advice or, dismiss or ignore or whatever. And this also shows his openness to listening to different methods in homeopathy also, different philosophies, different teachers. And therefore, it was very interesting that at some point, many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, Misha and I were sitting together, and I said, Misha, there is so much disunity in homeopathy and not understanding each other. What can we do about it? He said, why don't we get people together? I said, sure, let's do it. So for the first time, we invited the teachers from different schools and groups in Europe and even USA, India, etc., to a meeting, and a residential meeting where we would be together for 3 or 4 days, eat together, we would work together, we would recreate together, we would play football together, some of the best teachers in homeopathy. And you will be not surprised to know where this meeting was located. It was located in yonder court, in Misha's house, and it was called the Misha meeting. After that, because the number grew, we shifted it to a place called Gaunt's house, which also Misha located and organized. And that meeting, I believe, is still going on every year, annually, and people are participating. So that's the kind of, spirit he had. to attract this magnetic force that would attract people because of his openness, his modesty. And you see, similarly, you see, when you talk about openness, you also talk about openness to homeopathic ideas. So he's one of the people who initiated provings in a big way. He has done a lot of provings. I remember one I use a lot is Falco peregrinus. Another one I use is latex. Then he proved the AIDS nosode and so many other remedies. In fact, there's a whole book of provings published, I believe, by the School of Homeopathy. But what is also interesting is that he took it to another dimension, which I was very surprised. For the first time, as far as I know, he proved specific human beings. I mean, who can think of this? So there is a sort of saint in South India who was dead long ago. His name was Sri Aurobindo, and he had a follower called the Mother. So the Aurobindo and Mother established Auroville, which is a community in Pondicherry in South India. So Misha actually did a proving of Sri Aurobindo. I mean, what? Just imagine. So he found some relic of Sri Aurobindo, maybe a nail or a hair. I don't know what he found from somebody. And he did a potency of that and said, let's prove Sri Aurobindo. And the last week I spoke to him, actually just a week, 10 days ago. He said that he's involved in the proving of another very, very well-known person. So I don't want to reveal that name and all, because maybe, when the proving is out, it is more interesting. So he had ideas in homeopathy. He was open. You see, he was very open. I'll give you another example. There was a big controversy in homeopathy, you see, and the controversy was about this sensation method and this and that, and there was attacks on both sides and a lot of warfare kind of going on. At this point, Misha, he just said, and somebody said in that, and now what next, people will say, medicines made just by putting the vial on the paper with the name of the remedy, this will work. Why not? So people were being very sarcastic about it. And, and Misha stepped into that debate and he said, yes, that works also. Name on paper works. He said, I have experienced it. So when the patient was really, out of reach of any medicines, he would tell them, take a vial, put water in it, put it on a paper where you write Lycopodium or Pulsatilla and take that water. Now, you see, Misha was not an idiot, nor was he unscientific. But he didn't believe in rigidity, Everything had to be experimented. You had to experience and experiment. And he was very open to that he may not be right. You see, it was not always that he's going to be right. But he was ready always to experience, experiment, whether it was provings, whether it was something else. And these are all the spirits. And also in the same vein, he was extremely supportive of a lot of people. I know that Jeremy probably was a student and he had a lot of support and love from Misha and me too. So at some point, he would be in my seminars. Misha would come to many of my seminars and he would often be in the first row, and I always looked to him for, approval in some sense. For a long time, it was very important for me that Misha approved all the various, discoveries and the ideas that I brought forth. And he was so supportive and openly supportive of it, including, for example, my last development is called the WISE process, the Witnessing Inner Song Experience. This is the process that I developed recently, where you are able to witness your own deepest pattern at a very deep level through certain processes that I originated. And when I spoke to Misha about it, he was so supportive of the idea that in fact we organized a webinar with him and me where he interviewed me about the wise process, and he was so readily accepting to help, to contribute, to support. I mean, if you write to him, you will get a reply back immediately. For example, in the last 3 weeks, I've been writing a novel, and even in my earlier book, which I wrote, Dog, Yogi, Banyan Tree, Misha supported me a lot with his reviews and comments. I did the same with this book, and in fact, in the last 3 weeks, we were in correspondence every single day. I was sending him a chapter, and next day I would get a reply with his comments, and then next day I would send another chapter. And you will not believe this, on Friday, last Friday, I sent him the entire book for the first time, all the chapters. And I was waiting for his, because he told me, whenever you modify the book, send me, I will read it again. And I sent him the entire book on Friday by email. And on Saturday morning, Manny Norland, his son, he called me up and he said, I have to give you the news that Misha is no more. Can you imagine this situation? I also want to mention a few other things about him. He was a very artistic person. It's very interesting because his father was a very famous painter in, I believe, in Czech Republic. And he was Jewish. The father was Jewish painter, and he was so famous that his paintings are exhibited in many galleries in Europe. And I also heard that Stalin asked his father to do a portrait of him, you know. So that was the extent. And the father, because of the, persecution, etc., and threat, he escaped from Europe and landed up in England. So Misha probably has artistic traits, and Bridget, Misha's wife, is also a painter, artist, and a flute player. So there's a lot of art. I believe one of his sons also took up to music. So Misha was an avid art appreciating person, and also, you see, he was a poet and a very, very avid photographer. So he had an eye for the, he liked his camera, and he captured beautiful pictures. So this was his passion. And the other aspect of him, of course, was spirituality. So right from being a child to being a homeopath to being a friend, a supporter, an artist, and then he had a deep, deep understanding of spirituality. And it was not something theoretical or something, bookish. It was actually his life's experience. He lived it. And what did he live? He lived his truth, he lived his experience. He lived what he experienced. And at the same time, he could take distance from his experience and understand the impermanence of thoughts, emotions, patterns, etc., and stay in a state of, you can say, harmony, or stay in a state of balance. Inside there was something very balanced about him, very, very solid, that you could experience in his presence. Also a deep level of silence. And of course Misha had his fair share of, problems, fair share of human failings, etc., you can say. But he was also had the ability to rise above all this. And I want to share with you my last conversation with him. You see, what he told me was that he had a hip fracture about a month or 2 months ago. And there was a whole incident around that which he shared with me about that it was somehow a deeply spiritual experience. I don't want to go into all the details about this because it was a kind of a private communication. But he said that somehow the events around the hip fracture uh, really brought some kind of epiphany to him. And then he was operated upon. He came back. He started recovering from the hip fracture. When I spoke to him just a few days before, he said that I am now mobile. I can walk in the house, and my thing is recovering. But in that conversation, he told me, Rajan, I have been through a lot. I have been through hell and back also in many ways, and I feel now I am through all this. I have, what can I say, that in some sense it's over and done with. I have no, you can say, complaints about myself. I accept myself totally, and I accept everyone else, and I accept the situation completely as it is. And he said, Rajan, I am totally content and at peace with myself. It was such a beautiful thing to hear, because somehow the whole event of around the hip fracture and etc., and the heart stopping, etc., somehow it brought into his consciousness the last, I would say, barrier to, one would say, finding one's peace. Let's put it in a very simple way rather than saying enlightenment or nirvana, or I don't want to go there. But he found his peace. And then just a few days later, he died peacefully in his sleep. And somebody wrote beautifully, I read some of the things written about him. They said, Misha, he died as he lived, giving trouble to no one, just as peacefully, without bothering anyone, in his own bed, in his own house. And I think it's a beautiful way to go. This is what all of us wish for, that we die peacefully in our sleep, in our bed, in our house. And so I'm happy for him that he found his peace, that he went in this peaceful way. Only the loss is ours. Not only the community of homeopaths, not only his numerous friends and I would say lovers, even people who loved him deeply and whom he loved also. And also his family, his 4 sons, and they were very close. And Misha was also an affectionate grandfather as well. And he was very, very close to his sons. When I met his sons, I know them from, they were almost born, all of them. And they all called him Misha. I was also surprised that, in India, it's not the custom to call your father by name. I think probably not in other countries as well. But he was so informal with them. He was a friend. He was a friend to all his. So I think in a way he even taught me how to be a father. So I can't tell you how many things he taught me, and yeah. So that was who he was. So it's really, it's a great privilege and honor and fortune to have known him and to have spent this time with him. And it's, I wish that he lived some more. But as he would say, it's how it is. It is how it is. We have to we live with his memory, and that's it.